afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Economic Development and Innovation Committee meeting. Today, we are going to continue our work and discussion on community-centered economic development and strategic small business investment. And our discussion today is going to focus on accessory commercial units. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Green.
Chair Melton and members of the committee, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. As Mr. Melton said, just the one item on the agenda today, and this has been on your agenda previously. Council has discussed this community-centered economic development several times and made tremendous progress on this item. You remember at your last meeting in March, you reported out two items which council approved. One was the pilot program on creating farmers markets at our park sites, trying to get healthy foods out into the neighborhoods. The second item that the committee reported out as part of this overall item, and the council did approve, was to take a look at mobile retail and look at our requirements, look at the right-of-way issues, and come back to council with some recommendations, potential changes that could encourage additional mobile retail to get, again, food, services, retail out into the communities. Planning Department is working on that now and plans to bring that back to full council after your break, probably in the September timeframe. As Mr. Melton mentioned, today we're going to be focused on accessory commercial units, ACUs. You did discuss this at your meeting, your committee meeting on the 23rd. There was good discussion. Some of the council members shared some concerns and had some questions or clarification. The committee staff was asked to go back and bring back some more information on ACUs. Pat Young is here today from the Planning Department to lead that discussion. We have about a 15-minute presentation, and some of the issues that were asked to be clarified was, if council were to approve ACUs, what would be the process to approve? Council wanted some additional information on best practices, and again, if approved, even incentives that could be used to encourage the ACUs. So we have other folks on the line with us, including Veronica Creech, Brenda Poole, and other staff members to answer any questions the committee may have. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Director of Planning and Development, Pat Young.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, and thank you, Councilmember Melton and committee members. Pat Young with Planning and Development. I'll share my screen here in a moment. We have a brief presentation, as Jim said. As you heard from Jim, this will be the third time we've reviewed this material with you, and I won't reiterate what Jim said, but the focus today, as Jim just indicated, is reporting back on our research on best practices and what our peer cities have been doing with accessory commercial units. And then at the end, I'll turn it over to Veronica Creech with our Economic Development and Innovation team to talk a little bit about incentives for ACUs. I do want to quickly acknowledge Brittany Waddell, who's our Assistant Director, who's not able to be here today, but she led a lot of this research along with JP Mansoff and John Anagnost of our team who are on the call. So thanks to them. So as a reminder, refresher, accessory commercial units are commercial uses that are co-located with residential use. These are 4 examples from several of the peer cities we looked at: Memphis, Milwaukee, Portland, and Detroit. As you can see in these examples, they're bringing much needed retail opportunities at a small neighborhood scale to areas that are often poorly served by larger food and other necessities outlets. The first community we looked at was Memphis, and this is one of a series of 3. We're going to look at Memphis, Milwaukee, and Portland. Memphis, Milwaukee, there's several from our engagement, we learned several things. One thing is that you don't have to explicitly zone for ACUs to get the benefits and the potential of ACUs. You just have to make sure that they're clearly allowed by right in mixed-use districts. So that is fundamentally the approach that Memphis took. They have something called CMU, commercial mixed use, where they allow residential and commercial by right, as you see in the picture here. Very similar to what they do in Milwaukee. They have a district called LB2, local business 2, which allows residential and retail. It does limit the hours of operation on the retail. Again, this picture is a reminder, this is a vape shop. There's a broad diversity of uses that go in these ACUs, some of which are considered more desirable by the communities they're in, and some of which are not. So we'll return to that idea of restricting uses later in the presentation. Portland also does not have an explicit ACU designation, but they made some changes to their ordinance to make it clear that ACUs were allowed in their central commercial district CX, which is similar to our DX. And all three of these communities, and this is another theme we'll return to, had a lot of these developed prior to the middle of last century, prior to the advent of modern building and zoning codes. And I think what they were attempting to do was to make sure that these businesses could stay viable, add on, modify their storefronts, and not be nonconformities. And many of these are really treasured by the neighborhoods that they're in. But they have not seen a large uptake in new ACUs, but they have had a number of existing ACUs that were able to persist because of the flexibility allowed in these mixed-use codes. Detroit took a slightly similar, different but slightly similar approach. They basically require that they allow ACUs in their B2 district, which is local and residential business district. Residential uses have to receive a conditional use approval, so essentially a zoning approval. The idea here was that there was a large interest in people wanting to be able to live above their stores or behind their stores for safety and to ensure that they could operate 18 or 24 hours for some of these businesses. And so these districts are limited primarily to their downtown waterfront near the large parks. But that's another approach we could take, which is to allow residential uses explicitly accessory to commercial where commercial exists. That's another variation on the theme of how to get at this. Toronto had a very interesting approach. They have something called CR, commercial residential zoning, which is similar to what you've heard about previously, where retail services are permitted with conditions, limitations on interior square footage. They also have something called RAC, residential apartment commercial, which allows a limited number of retail uses in apartment buildings, mid and high-rise apartments. So again, this is another variation on how we can go at this if we choose to pursue this issue. But as I said, most jurisdictions have not directly addressed ACUs. What they've done is been permissive and allowed ACUs through allowing multiple uses in different districts. One last example we looked at was Seattle. We weren't able to get a visual example there. They really got their first group of ACUs going in now. And they're saying that anywhere commercial is allowed by right as an accessory use in all their residential commercial districts, which are like a mixed use district. And it's allowed in structures containing at least one dwelling unit or live work unit on the ground floor or lower level. Again, the idea of trying to encourage folks that have a small business that really serves the neighborhood. So another thing that all of these peer cities and our teammates talked to staff at these communities, one of the things they emphasized was the idea of having enhanced education and outreach around code enforcement and having standards in the ordinance about signage, trash receptacle, seating, and storage. Many of these businesses rely on being immediately on the curbside. So we would have to look at our setback standards and our other dimensional standards to make sure that they would accommodate ACUs if we continue to pursue this. Another important consideration or another way to get at deployment of ACUs is limited use standards. We can allow them by right, but we can impose, if we choose, limited use standards. This is similar to what we do now for home occupations. We do currently allow home occupations in Raleigh, but it's very limited and really precludes retail uses. It's usually, back office business or office, that kind of thing. We could take the same approach and add additional criteria such as square footage, height, setback requirements, compatibility requirements, and design requirements, and other parameters of that nature. One thing, though, that we are confident on, and I won't say too much on this because it's really more of a legal issue. I'll let our attorneys speak to this if you have questions. But we do appear to have very limited authority to restrict alcohol sales. We don't appear to have any authority on alcohol sales. On other types of products, our authority is limited. And I'll let the attorneys speak to that if you want to elaborate on that. I think two of our key takeaways, again, based on this engagement with our peer cities was, and I said this earlier, but it bears repeating, the vast majority of ACU examples were developed prior to the mid-20th century. As you've heard me say before, I think that this type of development where it was incremental over time and people would have residential or commercial or a mix of both at different points in the life cycle is a historical development pattern going back to antiquity. But since the advent of zoning codes, there's a lot of challenges and building codes. And I want to emphasize that for a moment here. In North Carolina, particularly, it's true in all these other states. The structural upfits that are necessary to meet the commercial code, the sprinklering, the firewalls, ADA requirements can be very costly and very complex, and certainly serve as a impediment. Not presenting this information to try to, it's a very promising idea, and we'll certainly support any direction you provide us. But I just want to make sure we emphasize the issues that are beyond zoning that impact the uptake on these ACUs. Last slide I wanted to share with you here is, and I know that might be a little bit hard to see. We also sent that out in the memo that went with this. The red on this map is our mixed-use zoning districts, which again today allow both residential and commercial. So if somebody wanted to develop a ACU on a residential in an RX or another mixed-use zone, they could do so. And you see also here in gray the food deserts as identified by the federal government with lower access to high quality foods. So where there's overlap between the mixed use districts and the food deserts, certainly there's tremendous opportunity there to under our current code. Really, it's just helping folks through the impediments realized by the cost and complexity of the building code and potentially our zoning code restrictions on things like setbacks, height, and utilization. So again, we can be happy to answer any questions, and that's a good segue to my colleague, Veronica Creech, to talk a little bit about incentives for ACUs.
Pat, thank you. And thank you, Brittany, and your team for shepherding us to this place. This is a really fascinating example of community economic development. So wonderful to be a part of the conversation. Let us advance to the next slide, Pat. This really sums it up, incentives for ACU. So our team did a national search to see what economic development incentives could possibly be leveraged across the country in the support of ACUs, and we really didn't find anything. When Pat and his team narrowed down the presentation to the cities that you heard about, I want to thank Amanda Driscoll and Nancy Krause from our team, the Office of Economic Development and Innovation, for doing some deep dive benchmarking in those cities with their economic development teams. And we learned even from our benchmark cities, there's no current economic development incentives to support the development or expansion of ACUs. In talking with the city attorney's office, this last bullet point here, if desired by council, our office could work with planning and development in the city attorney's office to propose or look into what might be possible, but we definitely don't have any examples that we could lean on that we learned about during this process. And yeah, there you go.
All right. Ms. Green, is that the end of your presentation?
Yes, sir. We're happy to answer any questions that council may have, and I know there was some members of the public also wanting to comment.
Yeah, let's hear from the public first before we turn it over to council questions and discussion. So if y'all want to go ahead and call upon the callers.
Yes, we have one caller today, and that is Jennifer Truman. Ms. Truman, you have 3 minutes to speak.
Hey y'all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Awesome. I'm really excited that you guys are discussing this topic. It's near and dear to my heart as a designer of local food systems and small local businesses. And I wanted to express a lot of gratitude to staff for looking at what our peer cities are doing and at historical precedent. I think that those are important steps. I want to comment from the perspective of one of my clients. And that is, what are the steps that it takes to go from having a house and working somewhere else to owning a business that I operate out of my house? And think about this process of permitting ACUs from that perspective. If I work at a bakery and I decide I want to go out on my own and bake my own pies, I can do that in my own home right now with the ag department. And most people in town that are doing that, and we see at our lovely farmers market, they don't have a home occupation permit. They don't have a live work permit. They haven't gone through that process, even though they should. And that's because the process isn't clear or publicized, right? But if they want to say, I'm going to start my own pie business, I'm going to make it out of my own house, how can they do that? Do they have to rezone their house to a mixed use zoning district? Do they have to get a special use permit? How many steps are we going to put in the process is a really important question, because they're already getting those food safety steps from the ag department and from the health department, right? And so what other zoning steps do we have? What other building code steps? That's the kind of perspective that I just want to add, because I think that many of these things are happening naturally in our city because people assume they can do them. And because historically, we look at all of these examples, it's a natural thing to start your own baking business. It's a natural thing to stop working for another hairstylist and open up a hair salon out the side of your house. Right? These are things that are occurring in our city that we don't necessarily have to encourage. We just need to stop discouraging them. And I think that we'll find that there are designers out there, and there are developers out there, and there are people out there who've already figured out the brass tacks of getting it done. And a lot of the conversation needs to be about, how do we make sure we have enough steps to keep it safe, but no more steps than that. And thanks y'all for listening today. I hope that perspective shift is useful to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Truman. I know that you care a lot about this topic, and I have enjoyed connecting with you about it offline. So I appreciate you calling in and sharing some of your comments. At this point, I'm going to kick it over to the mayor and my fellow council members for questions or discussion. Does anybody have anything? Mayor Baldwin.
Yeah, I have a question for staff. Have we thought about potentially looking at this as a pilot program? So doing something small and seeing what we can learn from, and maybe identify an area, and also even look at how we could incentivize something like that.
Yeah, Mayor Baldwin, this is Pat Young, with Planning and Development. I think that's a perfectly good idea. We would want to get some additional guidance and insight from you all about geographically where in the community we'd want to focus this, because we would have to probably modify zoning, at least if not the underlying zoning uses, the setbacks and the criteria to be successful. And I'll let Veronica speak to the incentives piece, which I do think also would be an important part of this.
Pat, thank you. And Mayor, thank you for the question. And again, I'm going to lean on our city attorney's office to help guide us in any kind of economic development pilot, we're absolutely happy to investigate, look into it, and even bring back creative approaches. But in working with Brandon on the response here to propose a program to incentivize, we could do something similar, at least look into something similar to the Building Upfit grant, just knowing that that model, we already have an example of that.
Mayor, this is Jim Green. I would just add, if this is part of council's direction, I think an opportunity as well to, as Pat says, once those areas are identified for a potential pilot, engage the neighborhoods as well and get some feedback. So I think there's an opportunity for engagement as well.
I saw Councilmember Branch's hand up and then Councilmember Knight.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the key criteria is making sure that there is a residential component. You know, because otherwise all you have is a corner store. And I think that residential component of this, if it's a pilot, if it's changing, whatever it looks like, having that residential component is key and critical, because that also assists and aids, I think, with our enforcement overall. So for me, that's key, because I've lived through the corner store issues, and those lack the residential component. And I'm sure RPD can speak to history of corner store issues that many we've closed. And I know our staff, we just worked with a private entity on purchasing a location because of issues at that vicinity, at that location. So residential of whatever has to be a key component of the establishment for me to be supportive.
Councilmember Branch, thank you for that. And we do have our deputy chief on the call as well. At an earlier meeting, I know the police department and our code enforcement staff went into enforcement issues and talked a good bit about that related to corner stores. And I assume some of those enforcement issues would pertain to potentially ACUs as well, but I don't know if the deputy chief wants to add anything to that.
Thank you, Jim, and Mayor and council members. Thank you for inviting me to the meeting. I'm sorry we were late. We had some technical difficulties with the invite. The enforcement issues, as Chief Jack Brown has said in the past, the enforcement issues around this matter, you know, they're varied, and unfortunately there's a lot of them. And just like Councilmember Branch just said, with the residential component, I think that's important, because the location he was referring to that was just closed down was a big driver of criminal activity in a certain neighborhood. So, and that's what we don't, I think, as a police department and probably a city, we want to steer away from something that's going to cause, you know, more problems than is going to benefit us in the city. So, you know, I'd be glad to expand on the enforcement issues. We could probably talk all day about that, but I think, you know, those commercial only businesses are going to be, you know, could lead to problems, but the proposal now for the smaller units, I think has more possibility of flourishing, you know, without the added element of the crime associated with some of these locations.
Thank you. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I want to follow up on Councilor Branch's comments too, because I had some similar thoughts. And I guess I'll preface this by, I think it would just help to see a draft ordinance to see how this looks. I think we're all seem supportive of the general notion and idea, but then how it's going to actually look. Because I was thinking of some unintended consequences as well. I don't know, and maybe Mr. Young could talk to this about what is the residential aspect of this? Is it a single detached single family house? Could it be in a small apartment or town? Because we get into other zoning elements too. So I need to know more about that. And then also there's some other things touched on that, will this bring parking requirements? Will it bring other building code requirements that we certainly don't, we want to hopefully not have to deal with, or we want to make it as easy as possible. So I think for me, it's trying to help those that may be out of code now that are doing what they are trying to do with small businesses in their homes, and then also not hindering those that want to. But again, I think there's some unintended consequences out there that we got to be careful of as we move forward in this, because I can just think of a lot of examples of what folks could try to do, and it may not be the best use. So anyway, I'd just like to see a draft ordinance, I guess, would be the most helpful thing. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll jump in closing, and I think y'all could probably guess I feel the complete opposite about this. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by initially focusing on unintended consequences. I think zoning from 30 years ago has created an environment where we're boxed into this situation where houses are here and businesses are here, and people have to drive and travel further to what they need. And now we're seeing a big shift to making that 15-minute city. And if we want Raleigh to lead the way on 15-minute cities, then we're going to have to think big and push through this. What are the minutia? What's the unintended consequences conversation? Something that really struck out to me when staff was talking about our peer cities, about how most of them have ACUs, they were built prior to zoning codes, and that all the work they've done recently is just to keep their old ACUs viable. They have had no uptake in new ACUs, even though the quote was they're treasured by their neighborhoods. And the other thing with Ms. Green talking about how she can't find a peer city that incentivizes ADUs. I don't think that should be a deterrent to us. I think it can be a motivator, because we can be the benchmark peer city on this issue if we can think big on it. And so, I think it was helpful to hear from Jen Truman, who works in this industry, sort of talking about how can we make it a clear process that has enough details to prevent bad things from happening, but not too much to prevent the good things from happening. And what steps can we put in to allow folks to provide goods and services in their neighborhoods, out of their homes, in a way that's safe, but provides accessibility to everyone. And so that's what I really want to focus on. I know there's a lot of hesitation on corner stores. That's frustrating to me as well, because I think we made it so difficult to have corner stores that all we really have right now are probably some really obvious bad examples, because we weren't allowed to really focus on corner stores and put them in other places and allow them to thrive. And so I feel like we're kind of stuck in a cycle now where we can just point to the really obvious bad examples, and so we're never going to try to do something different. I think ACUs are a good compromise. I like the conversation we had with RPD right now about, having that residential component will really help, and having the smaller scale will really help. So I think that this may be a good way to try. Something else that came up in the conversation too was there was a comment that in all our mixed use areas already, we're not getting a lot of the retail component from that as well. And so I would also like for us to look at what we can do. I think the recommendation was setbacks, height, utilization, and impediments in our existing code where commercial is allowed. So I would like to move forward the ACU component, and I also would like staff to come back with recommendations for our already mixed use district, how we can make it easier for commercial there. I feel like I rambled. I'm sorry. I care a lot about this topic, and those are my comments. Mayor Baldwin. My computer's like, you can't talk anymore. Mayor Baldwin.
That's what happens when you ramble. What can I say? So there's two sides on this, and I don't know that we have how can I put this? I don't know if we have a clear vote here in favor, which is one reason why I suggested we look at a pilot program. I went on an intercity visit to Seattle. And my big takeaway from that trip, we asked a woman, how come it was so difficult to build density in TOD districts? And she said, well, people can't love what they can't see. And I think that this is one of those instances here where what we've associated with the corner store are some of the stores that have opened, they sell primarily malt liquor, and they are part of the problem. If we can do some type of demonstration project and show what it is we are talking about, and then kind of learn from that, I think that could be a good compromise. So I'm just going to throw that out there as a possibility.
Councilmember Branch.
So I think my corner store comments clouded what I actually said. I support the idea with the residential component. So that was the key piece. And I used the corner store part to talk about the challenges that we have, and that maybe with the residential component, it will remove some of those challenges and barriers. But also I had a question here for staff that I wanted to ask, because we have our zoning piece and we talk about everything that from a city standpoint we can do. But when we talk about produce and food, there's a component that we're not responsible for. And I was wondering if staff has had any conversation with anyone on this, and that's the health department and the food and safety guidelines. They would have to be engaged in order for any of this to be successful. And has anyone had any conversation in that avenue or area? Because it's easy to go to Sam's and buy a big thing of chips and put them on a shelf and sell it. Yeah, you have a store. But what we're talking about are fresh vegetables, foods, are baked goods, things that someone does that is a little more in depth. So has there been any, and this is for staff, any conversation of anything that we may need to do to work with Food, Drug Administration, or the Wake County Health Department to ensure the success of the program that I think we all really want?
Yeah, Councilmember Branch, this is Pat Young with Planning and Development. It's a good question. We certainly work on an ongoing basis with the folks at the Department of Agriculture and the Health Department, depending on the product or type of products. It could be either one of those entities. And our review and permitting is not strictly reliant on theirs, but we obviously let them know that they are required under separate provisions of law. If you're doing homemade fresh baked goods for commercial sale, you do have to get approvals, as you heard from Ms. Truman, the speaker. So if you all give us direction to proceed on this, we'll certainly bring in the fire marshal, our building and safety team, Department of Agriculture, and the other partners that are involved to make sure we can be successful in getting this stood up.
So I think what I would like to propose is I think we should recommend this out with the direction that staff, to full council, asking them to approve staff to come up with a draft ordinance that can come back to the council table that we can look at. And then, at that time, it'll, I guess, have to go through the text change process, and we could explore further the idea if we wanted to do a pilot, though it sounds like, from what I'm hearing from Councilmember Branch and Knight, is this ACU, the mixed residential idea, they're more comfortable with. And if we could at least recommend it out and have staff start working on a text change, that might be the first step. The second piece is I would like to also empower staff to come back to us on adjustments we can make in our existing mixed-use commercial zoning regarding setbacks, height, utilization, and impediments in our existing code where commercial is allowed. Because I think we can do this two ways. I think we are allowing commercial. Let's make that easier. And then let's see what staff can come up with on an ACU text change that we can discuss at the council table. So those are my thoughts. What do y'all think?
I support that.
Was that your motion for someone to second, or?
Yeah, I'll try to say it in a more concise manner. So I move that we recommend that staff come back with a text change allowing accessory commercial units, and that we allow staff to look at impediments in existing code where commercial is already allowed. Seconded by Councilmember Knight. All in favor? All right, well, that was unanimous. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Green?
Just one clarification, Mr. Melton. Does the item itself stay in committee, or are you reporting the item out as well with these, with the recommendation?
Well, I think the only thing left in the item would have been the corner stores. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're going to get there right now. It may be a situation where we get some movement on the pop-up farmers markets and removing impediments in our existing commercial code, and we can get ACUs perhaps moving, and then we come back and look at the actual separate corner store issue at a later time. So I would be fine with recommending the whole item out at this time. Is there consensus on that from the committee members? Mayor?
I think we're missing an opportunity, but
I do too. What? Well, then,
So
we
just
could hold
keep it
the
in
corner stores. Good.
Hold a corner store part in committee, and we can work on that piece. I think it's worth, and there is actually a business owner that I wanted to get it in here and speak. Demetrius Hunter, Mayor. I wanted him to come in and speak because he's opened a location that is, I think, an example of what we're looking for and what we're thinking about. And I think hearing from someone who's recently done it, the challenges that they have had will help us figure out how to move forward and things of that nature. So those are my thoughts.
And I'm asking, it's certainly up to the committee. You can leave the item in and bring back corner stores for discussion at a later time and invite an owner of a corner store to provide some information. So that's fine to leave it in. I was just trying to clarify.
Great. So we will leave the item in for further discussion on the actual corner store piece. And we have just referred out ACUs and existing code recommended changes. Anybody have anything else? No? Well, this was a quick meeting. I appreciate all of your work, everyone. And I appreciate you spending the extra time coming up with some more examples. Yes, Mr. Green.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank staff as well. In particular, the planning department continues to put time into researching best practices. And Pat, thanks to you and your team, and Veronica and others for working on this item.
All right, well, meeting is adjourned. That was a quick one. Thank you for your work.